I can't pinpoint when the voices began. Every attempt to recall it hits a wall of blackness, a gaping void that swallows everything from before the training. But I've learned ways to summon fragments, to piece together the hollow echoes of that night. It always begins the same. A metal trash can crashes against the cold, unforgiving concrete, each clang tearing me out of a shallow sleep. I lurch upright, groggy and disoriented, in a standard issue bunk, thin sheets, a scratchy blanket, and the choking scent of antiseptic. My thoughts are slow, thick, muddied with confusion, as the shriek of orders jolts me to my feet. "Where's your rifle, soldier? Let's move." The voice belongs to him, Master Sergeant Rickson, a towering shadow with the brim of his campaign hat casting his face into darkness. Only his eyes glint beneath it, cold and sharp as steel. I'm halfway up when he seizes me, dragging me to my feet with a grip that feels less human, more like iron clamping down. "Rifle, Baker, where the hell is it?" The words claw at my mind, jagged and foreign. Rifle. My rifle. Was it with me? Or with Miller on guard duty? Where was Miller? A blow cuts off my spiraling thoughts. The impact leaves me sprawling on the ground, my head pounding in unison with Rickson's voice. "How do you expect to lead if you can't even keep track of a weapon, Baker?" The words sink into me, icy and unfamiliar. Baker. I am Sergeant Baker. I drag myself back up, but my voice cracks. "I don't know where my rifle is." Rickson steps closer, his hat's edge pressing against my forehead like a brand. "Get it together, Sergeant," he sneers before a hand raises to his collar. "Subject's memory loss is consistent," he murmurs into the radio. "Initiate training." The words make no sense, yet his tone drips with purpose. His eyes settle back on me, empty black pools. "Downstairs, Baker, now." I stumble after him down a maze of dark stairwells, the air thick and cloying. The hallways blend together, each identical door, each cracked tile indistinguishable from the next. My head throbs. Something tells me I've been here before, but any memory slips away like smoke, leaving only a clawing emptiness. Outside, dawn hovers just beyond the horizon, casting a shadow over the yard where Rickson stands with another figure, Colonel Lennox. His face stirs a flicker of recognition, but like everything else, it's shrouded in mist. He nods once, barely glancing at me. "Focus. Obey Rickson's commands." "Yes, sir," I reply instinctively, though his words twist something deep inside. A thread of recognition buried under layers of oblivion. Rickson gestures towards the ground, where parts of a rifle lie scattered in the dirt, an M4, familiar and alien all at once. He steps closer, slipping a blindfold over my eyes. "Assemble your weapon, Baker. Now." His voice is a hiss in my ear. My fingers tremble as they search out each piece, guided by some long-buried instinct. Lower receiver. Buffer spring. Bolt. The puzzle assembles beneath my hands, metal clicking together in the darkness until, finally, I feel it. The cool grip of my rifle, etched with the words, "Be good." Rickson's words echo, almost a whisper. "Your rifle. Remember it." As I tighten my grip, hands clamp onto my shoulders, dragging me a few steps forward. "Next," he growls. "Assemble the M2.50 caliber, blindfolded." The rifle slips from my grasp as I choke on a surge of fear. The M2, a beast of cold steel, with more parts than I've ever touched, let alone assembled blind. My fingers twitch, reaching out blindly as panic claws up my throat. Somewhere beneath the fear, something stirs, almost like a voice buried deep within, whispering fragments of memories that feel like shadows slipping further away. "I can't, Sergeant. I don't know how," I stammered, my voice trembling. Rickson's voice sliced through the room, harsh and sharp. "Then learn, Baker." I blinked hard, reaching out to grab the cold metal, fumbling over pieces I barely recognized. Bolt. Firing pin. Jesus, was that a cotter pin? I wiped a hand across my sweat-slick forehead, breath-catching as I struggled to piece together the components. An M2.50 caliber. I didn't know these parts. Not by feel, not blindfolded. A sudden brutal kick landed in my ribs, cutting my breath short as pain knifed through me. Execute, Baker, now. I didn't dare pause, hands diving for each piece, fingers moving faster and faster, more mechanical with each second, as if something else took control. Somewhere in the murk of my concentration, clapping echoed faintly, punctuating the silence like a death knell. "Well done, Sergeant," Rickson said, a note of approval threading through his voice. He turned to the colonel, muttering something I couldn't make out. We moved from weapon to weapon like this, me blindfolded, assembling each as though they were gears in some gruesome machine. The M110 sniper rifle, the M249 squad automatic weapon, the Mark 19 launcher. By the end, my hands were numb, covered in grime and the slickness of sweat, but my mind felt hollow, drained. A hand grazed my face, and I flinched as the blindfold was ripped away. Fluorescent lights blared above, making my eyes throb and my vision swim. The colonel was gone, but Rickson stood behind me, a strange smile tugging at his lips. "Get some rest, Baker. Up at 0430 sharp for language training." He turned and strode away, leaving me on the cold concrete pad. I climbed back to the barracks in a fog, where someone had left a plate of lukewarm meatloaf and corn on my bunk. I forced it down, barely tasting the flavorless mush, then dragged myself to the bathroom. The stark white tiles gleamed under an intense, glaring light that made the room feel sharp, unreal. My reflection glared back from the mirror, red, bloodshot eyes framed by hollow shadows, skin pale and stretched tight over bones. I looked like a ghost. I stumbled back to my bunk, collapsing under the weight of exhaustion. My eyes shut and I was out, but it felt like only seconds before Rickson's hands yanked me back to consciousness, jerking me out of bed with brutal urgency. Still half asleep, I threw on my uniform and he marched me down the stairwell to a dimly lit classroom. The colonel waited in the corner, his gaze fixed on a clipboard, unreadable. Stacks of papers lay on the tables, each covered in lines of foreign script, Russian, Arabic, Chinese. Rickson pushed a pen into my hand, pointing to a page in Arabic. "Translate." My mind stumbled, the shapes and letters blurring as pain throbbed behind my eyes. A whisper, like a distant voice, wove through my thoughts, coaxing the words out. My hand moved as if on its own, scrawling symbols and letters. Arabic poured onto the page, and pages filled with words I couldn't remember knowing. When Rickson's hand finally stopped mine, I blinked, staring at the stack of pages, 14, covered in writing I didn't even know I could produce. He nodded at the colonel, who watched with a stony face, and pushed me toward another stack of papers. This time, the script was Chinese, Sergeant Rickson. "I can't read Chinese," I managed, voice weak, shaking. Rickson's face was unreadable as he pointed to the pen and paper. My head screamed as I stared at the foreign characters, and suddenly voices flooded my mind, all speaking, one in frantic Chinese, another translating to English, a distorted mix of tones and accents. The characters danced on the page, merging into a dark blur as nausea churned in my stomach. Rickson's voice cut through, muffled, echoing as though I were underwater. The colonel scribbled notes in the corner. Then the world went black. When I woke, cold sweat clung to me, the room spinning as I struggled to remember where or who I was. I was lying on the floor, sprawled in a puddle of my own vomit, and Rickson's face loomed above me, cold and clinical, with a medic crouched beside him. Slowly, their voices cut through the pounding in my skull, pulling me back from the edge. "Can you hear us? Are you okay?" The words echoed, distant and hollow, barely scraping through my splitting headache. I tried to speak, but the sounds that left my mouth were garbled, like something broken and lost in static. Panic gripped me as my tongue felt thick and foreign, unable to form real words. "Relax," Rickson's hand pressed down on my chest, pinning me to the ground. "Just breathe." "We're taking you back upstairs." I nodded weakly, catching a glimpse of the colonel, who watched with that eerie expression, a strange mix of pity and disappointment. Before I could process it, darkness pulled me under. When I woke, the silence was fractured by a voice inside my head, low and commanding. "Escape. Choke out the guard. Make it downstairs." I gripped my knees, teeth chattering as the voice coiled around my thoughts, pressing, urging. I clenched my fists, fighting it, but before I knew it, my feet had hit the floor, and I was halfway to the door. "Dot ask for water." The voice twisted through my mind. Mechanically, I opened the door, my voice dry and rasping. "Water? I need water." The guard, barely awake, turned, reaching for his radio. I moved, my arm wrapping around his neck, my grip tightening as I squeezed, cutting off his breath until he sagged, unconscious. "Good. Now hurry." The voice surged again. I crept down the stairwell, heart pounding as I cracked open the door to the company area. I was about to sprint across the concrete when it whispered again. "Wait." I froze, spotting the beam of a flashlight sweeping across the concrete, another guard. Breath held, I watched him move on, turning the corner before I slipped out, moving quietly across the floor. I made it to the far door, the one leading to the language training rooms. The metal creaked under my hand as I pushed it open, slipping inside the dark hallway. "Find the colonel's office." The voice was clearer now, sharper. I followed its command, finding the office at the end of the hall, pushing inside and shutting the door behind me. The room was dim, shadows pooling around the colonel's heavy wooden desk. There, lying atop it, was a clipboard. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, eyes scanning the cover page. "Memory Fusion Project, Sergeant Baker." A sick twist coiled in my stomach. I flipped through the other pages, medical records, x-rays, psychological assessments, all with my name. Scribbled notes from the colonel's hand stood out in the mess of documents. Subject demonstrates language retention. Arabic translation complete. Chinese translation led to mental breakdown. Possible memory conflict detected. I stared at the words, feeling a rising horror. "Who are you?" I whispered to the voice in my mind, but only silence followed. Then the door burst open. Rickson stood in the frame, a handgun raised, eyes cold and unwavering. "Drop the documents, Baker." My throat went dry. "What did you do to me? What is this?" He shook his head, a faint sadness flickering in his eyes. "Drop it, Baker." The voice in my head growled, "Kill him. Escape." I took a step forward. The gun barked, and something struck my chest, a sharp pinch rather than pain. Looking down, I saw the thin shaft of a dart lodged in my skin. "Tranquilizer," the voice warned, its tone fading as my vision blurred. I staggered, my legs giving way as Rickson closed the distance, dragging me away. The world spun, and I fell into darkness, unable to move, locked in silence. When I regained consciousness, rough fabric chafed against my skin. My hands were bound, restrained against a solid surface. I twisted, testing the bonds, but they held fast, unyielding. Rickson stood over me, his face etched with something that almost looked like regret. "You're awake," he murmured. I tried to speak, to piece together fragments of myself, of whatever was left inside my mind. What did you do to me?" My voice was barely a whisper. Rickson sighed, looking weary, almost as if he pitied me. "It's a lot to take in. But it's true. You didn't hurt anyone, Baker, and I'm not here to punish you." A chill settled over me, a strange clarity pushing through the fog. "I didn't kill the guard, but what did you make me into?" Rickson's eyes darkened, the faint sadness hardening. "Something that could never be you. I just needed answers. Anything about the experiment, these tests, so I could do better." "That's good, Baker. I'll get the colonel." "We can talk before the next round," Rickson said with a nod. Yes, please," I muttered. "Will you take these restraints off?" "I'll have to ask the colonel." He vanished down the hallway, his footsteps fading. The voice crept back, dripping malice. "You have to kill them. It's the only way." I clenched my jaw, breathing heavily. Shut up, get out of my head." Rickson returned, the colonel trailing behind him with a smile stretched too tight. "I hear you had a little adventure last night," he said, his gaze sharp, dissecting. "Yes, sir," I replied, pasting on a fake grin. "Just testing out my new capabilities. I think the confusion, the sickness came from too much all at once. If you tell me more, explain it all, I'll be better. I'll do better." The colonel's eyes glinted, a flicker of approval. "It's an interesting suggestion." He nodded to Rickson, and I saw it. A glimmer of recognition, a memory. His younger face, handing me a challenge coin. "Sir, do you remember awarding me that coin?" I asked, watching for any reaction. A flash of shock crossed his face, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. "Yes, Baker, that was a long time ago." He gave a subtle nod, and Rickson leaned down, unfastening my restraints. Slowly, I sat up, rubbing circulation back into my wrists. The colonel settled into a chair opposite me. "You volunteered for a project," he explained. "We implanted certain knowledge and memories into your brain, tactical expertise, historical accounts, things no ordinary training could replicate. Imagine retaining our best leaders' lessons, their experiences, directly." "How long have I been here?" I managed, my mouth dry. His face darkened slightly. 2 years. The procedure has side effects. Memory gaps as new concepts are added. Some mornings you're fully aware. Other days we're starting over. A sacrifice for a stronger mind, wouldn't you agree? A voice snarled in my head. There were others. "They'll kill us too." "Escape." I pressed my fists to my temples, willing the voices to silence, and forced a smile. "How much training is left?" Rickson and the colonel shared a glance. "Hard to say," Lennox admitted. "The memory infusions have shown promise. But there are occasional setbacks, as with language training. Perhaps a month." "Escape," the voice hissed. "Kill them now." I gritted my teeth, nodding. "When can I start again?" "That's the spirit," the colonel said with a broad grin. "Rest today. We'll resume tomorrow." He stood, nodding to Rickson as he turned to leave. Rickson leaned closer, and without hesitation, my hand moved instinctively. My fist shot up, slamming into his throat. He gasped, clutching his windpipe, and I seized his sidearm, the cold metal biting into my palm. The colonel turned, but it was too late. I fired a dart, the tranquilizer hitting him squarely in the chest. His eyes widened, and he staggered, his words slurring as he sank to his knees. "You won't escape. No one has." "Lies," the voice hissed. "Escape." I gave one last look at the colonel's crumpled form, and then I fled, slipping through the shadows of the compound, down corridors I barely recognized. Now, crouched in the woods northeast of the base, I'm recording this message for anyone who can hear. Please, someone, find me. I'm hidden, but they're close. Send help. I hear them coming.